Rivian's R2 has officially entered production, and the first employee vehicles are already out in the wild, which means we now have EPA filings that tell us a lot more about what buyers can actually expect. And while most people are focused on the 335-mile EPA number, that's honestly the least interesting part about what came out. The range result was pretty much what I expected. What stood out to me was what Rivian's EPA filing tells us about the battery and what that could mean if you plan to keep this vehicle for a long time. Given the size, features, range, and price of this 2-row, 5-seat SUV, it's no wonder people are lining up just for a chance to sit in one. But now that we have more concrete details, there are a few things worth taking a closer look at. I'm going to walk through the 3 takeaways from these EPA filings, including one thing I think a lot of people are reading wrong. So let's get into it. First, let's talk about the range, because I think this is where a lot of people are reading far too much into the EPA results. A lot of people saw that 335-mile EPA number and immediately assumed that Rivian was sandbagging yet again, and that owners are secretly going to get more range than the company is advertising. And well, that's probably not the case. The EPA gives every EV a standardized range rating, but the more important part is how each automaker chooses to market that particular number. Rivian has historically been fairly thoughtful here. Take the Gen 2 R1S Max Pack with the efficient 22-inch road tires for an example. The EPA rated it at 410.14 miles, and Rivian listed it at a clean 410. Pretty straightforward. But with the less efficient 20-inch all-terrains, the same Max Pack was rated at 389.04 miles, yet Rivian marketed it at 370 miles. That's a meaningful gap between the EPA rating and what was ultimately advertised. And the reason is simple. Rivian knows how these vehicles are actually used in the real world. They'd rather underpromise and have their owners pleasantly surprised than put out a big headline number that most people never actually see. That applies here as well with the R2. The R2 on the range-optimized 21-inch wheels hit 335 miles in EPA testing, while Rivian is listing it at 330. The more rugged 20-inch all-terrains, which are only available in the performance trim, resulted in 314 miles versus Rivian's stated 307. These are totally normal variances. This isn't some hidden set of extra miles that Rivian lost in the couch cushions. It's Rivian doing what Rivian has always done, balancing the test cycle with how people actually drive. This is exactly what you want from automakers, so as a buyer, you have a far more realistic expectation. 330 miles is extremely competitive for a vehicle at this size and price point, especially for people that are cross-shopping something like a Tesla Model Y. A long-range, all-wheel drive Model Y is rated for 327 miles, and the Performance Model Y is rated for 306. Rivian made sure the R2 beats Tesla on range for both of these popular configurations. So yes, the range matters. And if this kind of deeper Rivian analysis is useful, I also send out a free weekly Rivian Recap newsletter linked down in the description. But the part of the EPA filing that stood out to me had nothing to do with range. It was the battery chemistry. And if you followed Rivian for any amount of time, you already know that chemistry isn't just some detail on the spec sheet. We already got a real-world lesson in this with Rivian's LFP-based dual standard pack for Gen 2 vehicles. On paper, LFP is fantastic. It's durable, handles repeated charging well, and generally holds up better long-term. But in the real world, especially in colder climates, it came with trade-offs. Owners saw more winter range sensitivity than they originally expected. And Rivian even had to ship software updates to better show the impact of cold weather range loss, so owners had a clearer picture of what was happening to their range. And now, the dual standard has been discontinued altogether. Battery chemistry can easily impact your satisfaction in owning an EV. A lot of us, myself included, assumed that Rivian would probably use some version of the NMC chemistry we've seen hold up really well in R1 vehicles. Instead, the EPA filing shows that R2 is using NCA chemistry. That lets Rivian fit more usable range into a smaller, lighter, and cheaper battery pack, and that's a big part of how they're getting over 300 miles of range at this price point. But it also comes with more sensitivity to heat and repeated fast charging. That's the part I'd pay attention to. According to a study published in Science Direct comparing NCA, NMC, and LFP battery wear under real-world charging loads, NCA showed the highest likelihood of capacity loss over time. After only around 300 cycles, NCA showed capacity loss in the 10 to 15% range. And we've already seen something in that ballpark play out in the real world. Kyle from Out of Spec Studios recently showed about a 15% range loss in his 4-year-old Tesla Model S Plaid, which also uses NCA chemistry.
But this generation Model S is known for capacity fade or having less durability in terms of longevity than other Tesla models out there. My Model 3, for example, lost about 10% capacity, maybe 11% capacity in our 100,000 mile update. Also similar age to this car. This car has 60,000 miles and only, again, 4 years old, just under 4 years old, and it has significantly higher degradation than my Model 3 has had, but I've actually used this car in a much more gentle way.
Now, Rivian and Tesla are using different packs, different cooling strategies, and different software, so this isn't always a direct comparison, but it does reinforce the broader point that chemistry affects the ownership experience. The same study showed that NCA degradation worsened most in situations that looked like repeated DC fast charging, where the battery gets hotter and sees more stress. Under normal use, especially if you charge at home most of the time, the difference versus NMC was much smaller. So no, this does not mean R2's battery is doomed, but it may mean that R2 owners should be just a little bit more intentional about charging habits than Rivian owners have had to be in the past. There's one other detail in the EPA documents that caught my attention. Rivian is actually adding an in-car battery degradation screen so owners can actually track battery health over time. That could be really good for transparency, but it could also suggest that Rivian knows buyers may be paying closer attention to battery wear on R2 than they ever did on R1. Adding a screen like this makes any change in range easily understood by drivers. That said, this isn't automatically a critical issue, which I'll cover in just a moment. There were also two pretty positive details in these filings. First, Rivian says they plan to include a mobile connector for free if customers request one. That may sound small, but it's actually a reversal from what we've seen with the much more expensive 2026 R1S and R1T. And second, the R2's gross vehicle weight rating is 6,173 pounds. That means it should qualify for a Section 179 deduction if you use it more than 50% of the time for business. Obviously, check with your tax advisor on your specific situation. So, where does all of this leave us? The R2's EPA range was exactly what I expected and doesn't justify the clickbait headline you've seen other content focused on. The bigger takeaway is that Rivian likely made a deliberate trade-off here. They prioritized packaging, price, and top-end range while accepting that owners may need to be a little more thoughtful about charging if they plan to keep the vehicle long-term. For most people, that's probably still a very reasonable trade. Rivian says that R1 owners only fast charge around 10 times per year on average. If R2 owners have similar charging habits, battery wear may be much less dramatic than what testing may suggest, especially if they keep their daily home charging limit set to the suggested max of 70%. And the result is a Rivian R2 with real range, a more attainable price, and packaging that makes a lot more sense for a huge number of people. If you want to better understand how charging your Rivian actually works and what matters in the real world, I've actually got a full breakdown you can watch here. It'll help you understand home charging, fast charging, and how to think about all of this as an owner. Until next time, stay curious.